How's it going, everyone? It's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's openings video, we're going to be talking about the Petrov Defense. The Petrov Defense is a symmetrical king's pawn opening, e4, e5, and after white plays their most popular move here, knight f3, instead of defending this pawn by playing d6 or knight to c6, both very popular moves, black instead plays knight f6, just counterattacking white's e4 pawn, and this is the starting position of the Petrov Defense. For a long time, the Petrov has kind of had a reputation for being a boring opening because of its symmetry, especially after white takes on e5 and black takes on e4 in some lines, but there's certainly ways that both players can try to play for a win, so we're going to take a look today at how they can do that. So white's main move remains knight takes e5, simply winning that undefended pawn, and black should actually not take on e4 right away. If black plays knight takes e4, go ahead and pause the video if you want and think about what white could play here. But if you're back with me, queen e2 would be a very nice move here for white. Black actually is struggling to find a move here that doesn't lose material. For example, if black played d5 to defend this knight, white could simply play d3, trying to kick this knight out of the way. The knight can't really move because after knight f6, or really knight anywhere else, there would be knight c6 check, winning the queen because this is a discovered check on the king and the queen is under attack. Same thing, of course, after queen e2 if the knight moved right away. Knight c6 is winning for white. If black tried to play d6 to counterattack white's knight, then white's going to end up at least up a pawn after queen takes knight, pawn takes knight, and now queen takes e5, white is up a pawn. There's a couple ways black can try to wriggle out of this, but the bottom line is that after knight takes e5, knight takes e4 can get black in a lot of trouble. So if black wants to win their pawn back, black should play d6 first, kick this knight away, and now black can safely play knight takes e4. Now queen e2 would be ineffective because black can play queen e7 and just defend their knight. So instead, white usually plays d4 and grabs some more central space, and black responds by playing d5. This is the classical main line of the Petrov, and with the completely symmetrical pawn structure, it's easy to see why some players consider it boring, but it's still possible to get some play here. For example, bishop d3 is white's main move. Black could play knight c6 here, castle, bishop e7, and if white adopts kind of a passive setup with something like c3 and just playing knight d2 to exchange this knight, you could end up in a very symmetrical position, but white could play c4 here and try to mix things up. By not playing c3, this kind of invites black to now play knight b4 and harass this bishop, but okay, now white can play bishop e2, and black could take here on c4, and then after white took back, we would have an isolated queen pawn position. White would have the lone pawn left in the center of the board, but it would be isolated, so it could be a target later on, but in the meantime, it really opens things up for white's pieces to develop, and so white has succeeded in kind of freeing himself from this symmetry, and we would have an exciting game from there. Instead, though, black could just castle here and keep going with their development, and now if white plays knight c3, white's inviting another kind of imbalance to the position by allowing black to double their pawns with knight takes c3. Of course, the doubled pawns are not really a concern because this c-pawn's going to get exchanged off at some point, and white will not be left with doubled pawns, but it still isolates this a-pawn, and once again, we're getting some imbalances there. Black would have some things to be happy about, but white would still get some improved control over the center after this b-pawn comes to c3. So one of the lines continues bishop f5, just developing a piece, and now after a3, black can now exchange on c3, b takes c3, knight c6, rook to e1, and after something like rook e8, white could play c takes d5 and get rid of their isolated pawns, and we're left with these hanging pawns here on d4 and c3. Not hanging as in they can be taken right away, but we have the hanging pawns pawn structure here. These pawns give white a space advantage, but if they can be blockaded, they could be a target later on. And once again, black has the more compact pawn structure. Black only has 2 pawn islands, whereas white has 3 pawn islands. One here, and one here. So there's the main line, and again, it can be pretty symmetrical, but it's also not as drawish as it looks. White has a couple alternatives, though. Going back here after knight takes e4, instead of playing d4 and grabbing the center right away, white sometimes plays knight c3 here, just immediately developing a piece and challenging this knight. This invites black, of course, to double white's pawns with knight takes c3, but after d takes c3, not only does this open up a line for the bishop, but white might even use these pawns here on the queen side as a shelter for their king. White can sometimes castle queen side on this line and try to play for an attack on the king side. So I pulled a sample line here to look at as well. Black can play bishop e7, just finishing up their kingside development, But a lot of times black's going to delay castling for a bit here. Black's going to want to keep white guessing about where that king is going, because if black castles too early, white could really get an ideal attacking setup against that king after white castles queenside. So, for example, bishop e3, knight c6, queen d2, bishop e6, black's just developing all their pieces to their most natural square. If white castles long here, black does not want to take on a2, because after bishop takes a2, this bishop would be trapped after b3. This is a pretty well-known trap. So black should not fall for that. After white castles, instead, black should simply play queen d7. Again, just finishing up their development, all the pieces go to their best square, and now black can castle either way. Many games have actually reached this position. Some of them have continued king to b1, bishop to f6. Again, black's not committing that king just yet. Now white plays h4. Again, because the king's over here on the queen side, there's no reason to refrain from pushing these kingside pawns. There's no king they're leaving behind here on g1. So white's trying to begin some operations there on the king side, possibly using this g5 square for one of their pieces, for example, knight g5, not only attacking this bishop, but also if black were to exchange on g5, now white could open the h-file. So h6 is black's most popular move here, just denying that g5 square to the white pieces. This could be weakening of black's king if they castle kingside. For example, g4, g5 could really use the placement of this pawn to open some lines. So by now it's kind of clear that black is committed to playing castle's queenside instead of castle's kingside. After h4, h6 is inserted, this king would probably not be very safe here on g8. So knight d4, and black is captured both ways here on d4. Either knight takes d4 or bishop takes d4. They're both possible. Let's just say bishop takes d4, and I found it interesting here that white sometimes doesn't even undouble their pawns with c takes d4, which you might think was the idea behind that knight d4 move. Bishop takes d4 is certainly a reasonable move here for white, just putting pressure on this g7 square. And one of the points is that if black takes it, then white can even play queen takes d4, and not only is g7 still under attack, but black is also prevented from playing castle's queenside for now, because this a pawn would be loose, and it's kind of hard to dislodge this queen. You never really want to move this c pawn, because this d pawn would become a huge target. It'd be a backwards pawn on this file, and here, of course, it could even be taken right away. So instead, after bishop takes d4, black will often just play rook to g8, and after bishop b5, I would probably prefer white's position here, although black is probably doing fine as well. So we've looked at knight takes e5. White also can play d4 here, just challenging this e5 pawn right away. This is called the Steinitz attack, and if black were to take this pawn here on e4, white's going to get a pawn back on e5. But first, white can throw in bishop d3 to gain a tempo on that knight, and after black plays the very logical d5, white could play knight takes e5 here, and we would get that symmetrical pawn structure again that we saw in the main line, but I've experimented here in tournaments with d takes e5, trying to imbalance the pawn structure and trying to get a space advantage here. Black can respond with knight c6, or black will often play knight c5, trying to threaten to remove white's bishop pair here. And white could either allow that, or white can just play bishop back to e2 and waste that tempo. The knight is still kind of awkward here on c5. And both sides are probably just going to finish up development from here. White can try to strike at the center at some point with c4, and we'll get an interesting game. After white plays the in-between move bishop d3, we looked at d5. Black actually has a pretty funny alternative here. Black can play knight c6. And I remember I never saw this move until someone played it against me in a tournament, and I was kind of shocked at first. I was like, what's going on? Is this 2000 player really just giving me a piece here on move 5? But it took me a while to understand that black's actually getting their piece back in every line. If I play bishop takes e4 here, now black gets to play d5, and after bishop d3, e4, and black's going to get their piece back. And if I instead play after knight c6, d5, trying to stop black from playing d5, and now black has two pieces under attack, so it once again looks like black's going to lose a piece. Black once again can get their piece back, because they're going to play knight c5, and if you take on c6 here, they play e4. And once again, you have your bishop and knight forked. So it's pretty amazing that this knight c6 move actually works. It's definitely not as popular as just playing d5 to defend the knight, but I wanted to point out that that option exists so that you don't get shocked like I did when you play this line in a tournament and get hit with this knight c6 move. So those are all the main lines of the Petrov defense. I want to point out there's certainly nothing wrong with just playing knight c3 to defend this pawn, and black really has nothing better here than to transpose to a 4 knights game after knight c6. So I guess black could say, you know, mission accomplished, I avoided the Ruy Lopez and the Italian game, I got a 4 knights game, but if you're comfortable playing the 4 knights, this is definitely an option you can consider as well. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to visit chesspathways.com by clicking the link down in the description and get signed up there. It's totally free, it's really quick, and after you sign up, I will send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking. So please let me help you become the best chess player you can be, and get signed up at chesspathways.com. Thanks, and I'll see you there.